Good evening to those on the East Coast, and good afternoon to those like me that are on the West Coast. My name is Dr. Sidney Freeman Jr., and I am so excited to have a colleague and friend, Claudia Allen, with us tonight. This is the first time that we're launching this program where we're having one-on-one conversations with thought leaders across our denomination, asking questions about decolonizing the Black Adventist mind. And we're so glad to have Claudia here to share her thoughts. Thank you, Claudia, for being here.
I'm so excited to be here, Sydney. This is a great conversation that you've been having for the last few weeks. And so it's truly a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're building up to is this Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to have a broader discussion with other individuals about decolonizing the mind. It's the first panel was excellent, and I'm sure that this next group of panelists are going to take us to even higher heights. So I'm really excited about it. This won't be a long interview, but we just wanted to ask a few questions and just to give people a taste of what they're going to get on Friday. And so, excuse me, on Sabbath. So if you could just share with us your thoughts about what it means to decolonize the Black Adventist mind, and is it important?
Yeah, man. So I think that decolonizing the Black Adventist mind is very important. And I think that the way that one goes about doing that, I personally believe is intellectually. So, I approach the world through language, as a literary critic and scholar. And so I believe that when you change your language and the way that you understand certain ideas and concepts, at that point, you open yourself up to no longer being constrained by those languages and concepts, right? So we believe that the world is constructed by language. So colonialism was not just this idea that people kind of physically came and enchained you, but rather in that physical bondage came binding language.
Yeah.
And so to really decolonize or to kind of free and liberate yourself from the residue, right? Because technically we are physically emancipated. In order for us to kind of emancipate ourselves from those ideas, we have to actually change our language. And so I think that is going to require us to read theology, read thinkers that we otherwise would not read. And I think that this is crucial for Black Adventists and just Adventists in general, because so much of Adventist culture and Adventist theology is rooted in Adventists.
Right.
Right? Like we only read each other. We only talk to each other. And the fact of the matter is that Adventism is a white American Christian religion. It is another denomination. It was birthed out of, the Millerite movement, right? So that means that it has white supremacist, white American cultural problems.
Yeah.
And when we try to pretend as though our denomination, our religion, our theology does not have those problems, we make ourselves susceptible to remaining in bondage. And so I encourage people to read books that are by theologians, and particularly individuals who are, one, not white, and two, not Adventist. And I think that when you kind of broaden your language in that moment about God and about who God is and about how we come to God, about how we understand spiritual things, you immediately kind of loose your brain and loose your heart from the things that would traditionally bind you.
I like what you're saying about just a change in language. One of the authors that Dr. Tiffany Llewellyn likes to talk about is Dr. DeGruy, Joy DeGruy, and her work about
The post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Yes, that's it. And could you talk about Is it just religious literature that will help to us to decolonize our minds? I know you talked about kind of black theology as I'm calling it, but womanist theologian. Are there certain is there should we just focus in on religious texts, or are there other texts that may inform us decolonizing our minds?
Yeah, no. So for one, I do read, like I have got this stack here of things that I'm particularly interested in, right? That I think kind of work. Just some book recommendations for you. Now
All
these
right.
are, let's start with the religious, right? Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. All right.
Okay.
So that book is going to break down the American doctrine of discovery and how that has created a problematic American Christian theology. All right. These two I still haven't read yet, but I'm interested in because these are books by Japanese theologians
Wow.
that are really exploring who God is through the lens of Japanese culture and Japanese theology.
Could you give us the authors of those texts that you're showing?
Yes, absolutely. So, Water Buffalo Theology is by Kosuke Koyama, and the Theology of the Pain God is by Kazo Kitamori.
Oh, wonderful.
And
Thank you.
I'll type these in the comment section as well. And then,
Okay.
of course, I am particular. This is where I started personally because this is kind of where my heart is with Native American theology. So I've started with Rescuing the Gospel from the Cowboys by Richard Twiss.
Ooh.
And I have yet to get into this beauty yet, but God is Red, a native view of religion. And then, of course, my good friend Victor Bartley put me onto this book called Traditional Ritual as Christian Worship, Dangerous Syncretism, or Necessary Hybridity. So this
Ooh.
book is more of a compilation that
Okay.
includes writers and thinkers and theologians from a variety of countries and nationalities and the such. But in terms of further diving into an experience of broadening your language to decolonize your mind,
Yes.
I would strongly encourage you to, yes, read womanist theology. Yes, read Black liberation theology. Read the things that I've just listed for you, but really get into some fiction. Black
Wow.
women and Black people have actually been exploring spiritual ideas about God for decades, right? I mean, whether you have the slave narratives that really kind of break down the nature of God as being a very present help in the physical journey to emancipation. And then you kind of jump to the 1930s, 1920s and 30s in the Harlem Renaissance. And all of a sudden now Christ has been colored. Right. So now our God has been racialized, like in the poetry of County Cullen. And in that moment, we then get that first experience of Jesus and the cross being likened to the lynching tree, right?
Wow.
So now the experience of God is being seen in the contemporary experience of Black people. But then when you jump down to the 1970s with, for instance, Ntozake Shange's For Colored Girls, she ends that Choria poem saying, I found God in myself and I loved her fiercely, right?
Wow. Yeah.
That might be, particularly uncomfortable for us as readers to conceptualize God with the pronoun her or she, and to think that maybe we shouldn't call him the father, but really call her the mother. These are all ideas that are very uncomfortable for us, right? But just like Delroy Brooks said in the comments, God is in the sci-fi. Octavia Butler is a fantastic author that I encourage you to read. She definitely delves into a lot of ideas about the spiritual and the theological in ways that we are not particularly accustomed to. And I think that when we enter into theological conversations with individuals that are not theologians,
Right.
you immediately open yourself up to saying, man, how is the regular person thinking and conversing about God? And how can this inform who I believe God to be? And
Wow, this is
it's
heavy.
okay. It's okay to disagree with it. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
okay to read the works of Alice Walker and feel like there's no scripture to support that, or my understanding of the Bible doesn't support that. But I think that one thing that we've got to do is we've got to make ourselves a little uncomfortable. We've got to make ourselves okay with saying God has not been figured out by white people.
Yeah.
God has not been figured out by white people. And so that means that I need to embrace, ingest images and language about God that are by individuals that are not white. And I think that that is the journey. That is the journey of truly decolonizing your mind. It is, where are the images and the language of God, things about God, by individuals that are not white and are not theologians. There's power in coming to know God outside of the scriptures and outside of traditional academic theology.
Wow, this is amazing. I've been to add to what you've been saying. I've been thinking about the role of racism in the black person's life, in particular, how it impacts our imagination, and a lot of times, for many of us, it has stifled our imagination. And what you're saying is, so let's say in the academy, for instance, a lot of times we're pushed to engage in very specific types of topics because there's so many needs that we have. So trying to do something that is fiction is kind of looked down upon, or esoteric, as they may say, because there's so many practical needs that our people have. But what I'm hearing you say is that there's a need for both in thinking about the black religious life and in the process of decolonizing our minds. In saying that, what are some practical steps that people can take in the process of trying to decolonize their mind? And I'm asking it in the context of you being a African American or American descendant of slaves. Could you kind of give us some thoughts related to that?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that that's an interesting question. I think one, I will say, I think that individuals outside of Adventism kind of do this already, right? So, I mean, right, like when you even look at the theology and the writings of James Cone, he draws heavily upon both the fiction and nonfiction of Black authors, whether that be Martin Luther King or, as I mentioned, Calvin T. Cullen's poem, The Black Christ. So I do think that there are some individuals, AME, Baptists, there are Black churches, Black theologies that have already kind of ventured to really excavating Black literature, Black fiction, Black poetry, to see and understand how God has been viewed and understood within our community and within our culture. Because, as African people, we do not separate the sacred from the secular. We
Right.
are one spiritual being that has one natural experience. So therefore, all that I am, all that I understand about the spirit, I am going to feel and experience in the natural.
Right.
And so there shouldn't be a distinction between poetry, fiction, nonfiction, biography. Genre is merely a structure within which one writes and delivers one's writings, but they should not be kind of compartmentalized and separated as though they cannot be studied together. That said, I think that as an African American descendant of slaves in particular, I think the truth of the matter is that many of us are not still in the Adventist church for many of the reasons that we have already discussed. So, because of the institutional racism that exists within the church, because of the kind of antiquated colonialist theology that exists within the Adventist church, many African American descendants of slaves are no longer Adventists. So that when you really look at the evangelistic growth of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America and around the world, it is the result of the evangelizing of immigrants.
Yeah.
And so individuals have been evangelized either in the Caribbean or on the continent. And when they immigrate to the States, they bring that with them. Or individuals that come from those countries come here and they are more easily evangelized with our colonialist theology. Whereas Black Americans are not here for that because we have a history that is attached to hush harbors and the creation of inherently kind of Black American theology and Black American religious experiences here in this country. Churches and denominations that are germane to this experience and this country that kind of prevent us from being able to really kind of receive all the problematics, the racial problematics at least, that come along with Adventist theology and church culture. So I think that Black American descendants of slaves that are Adventists don't really need to have a decolonizing moment because they really aren't here. And the ones that still are here, at least from what I have seen, they don't. It's like they take what's great from Adventism and they throw out the bad. Wow. You know, so now that is just a personal experience. No. I'm not saying that I cannot make a blanket statement about all Black Americans who are descendants of slaves who happen to be Seventh-day Adventists. I cannot say that. But for me personally, as a Black African descendant of slaves, having grown up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church with other Black Americans who are descendants of slaves, I actively cannot remember a time when my mind was decolonized, if that makes sense. Even growing up, I've gone to only predominantly white Adventist schools. I have gone to predominantly white churches as well as regional conference churches. In spite of seeing all the white Jesus felt in the Sabbath school classes, all the white Jesus stuff on the quarterlies, and, you know, any other kind of spiritual content within that experience, my home life really reinforced and said, Jesus is not white. I grew up around a lot of Black art. I grew up around a lot of Black books and Black authors. So I never had that experience of an awakening, like I've been set free. Like I really kind of grew up theologically liberated. Now there are other aspects of, I think, a more free theology that I did not have, right? Like, so for instance, you know, I definitely grew up more traditional and conservative to where, you know, my family probably would not be comfortable with me reading, you know, about West African spirituality, right? You know, like if my mother found out I was pouring libations somewhere, it would be a problem, right? So I think that there are certainly spectrums, but at least I think the kind of the foundational idea about God and Christ and the nature of God and Christ in relation to white supremacy and colonialism. I, as a Black American descendant of slaves, was not raised in that theological framework.
And to follow up on that, there's a conversation about the need for a possible Black Adventist theology, given that the theology that we currently have assimilated into is one that does not take into account our experiences. What are your initial gut thoughts about
Mhm.
a need for that? Is that needed or is it not? Kind of what are your
I'll
thoughts?
be honest, I have mixed feelings.
Hmm.
On the one hand, I do agree that there should be kind of a Black Adventist theology, but then on the other hand, as someone who has studied at length liberation theology and Black theology and womanist theology, it's never denominational, right? Like when Baptists write about Black theology, they don't say, this is the Black Baptist theology. This is the Black African Methodist Episcopal theology. This is the Black Catholic. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just Black theology. So there's a part of me that feels like that is unnecessary and just kind of feeds into our same narcissistic practices as Adventists that everything has to be Adventist.
Right.
Whereas, outside of Adventism, and particularly outside of Adventist academia,
Hmm.
it's very much so just what is it that you're saying? Like, what is it that you're creating? Like, it doesn't need all these qualifiers. So there's a part of me that feels like we definitely need a Black theology that approaches things potentially from an Adventist lens. But I guess I don't necessarily feel compelled to put Adventist in it. I'm saying if I'm just saying, here is because this is what happened with womanist theology, right? James
Hmm.
Cone comes out and says, this is Black theology. Dolores Williams comes along and says, hey, you left out Black women.
Hmm.
So she didn't come along and say, okay, we need a Black womanist, we need Black woman theology. She just came along and said, here, this is what we add to it. Here is womanist theology. Here is, this kind of particular aspect, right? And so my thing is like, okay, I think womanist and Black are, it makes sense that she would come up with a separate thing, but we are Black.
Right.
We do not need a specific denominational approach. I think that all it is, there are things that we as Adventists believe, like the second coming, the three angels' messages, prophecy. There are ways in which we understand scripture that need to be read and written through a Black theological lens. So do that work, do that research, write that stuff. And I just specifically believe that it will be of benefit to the Baptists and it will be of benefit to the
Right.
Methodists. And it will be in the same way that their theology has been of benefit to us. The moment that you slap Adventist on it, it makes it exclusive immediately.
Right.
So that this theology is not for anybody but Black Adventists. And if we're believing that our theology and the three angels' messages and the second coming has power and is critical and is important, then we probably should package it in a way that people who aren't Adventists would find it appealing and want to actually add it to their personal theological arsenal.
Right. And I've been talking to a different colleagues and just about this topic, even labeling this, decolonizing the Black Adventist mind. One of the things, the people that have really enjoyed it. I'm not saying that Black Adventists that it hasn't resonated with them, but
Mhm.
there are a lot of non-Adventists that are saying, "I've been waiting. They have been waiting for this. When are you opening this thing up?" Because there is a definite need for this broader conversation. So that what you're saying resonates with me.
Yeah. I mean, the Black Episcopalians need to be decolonized in their
Yeah.
theology, right? The Black Catholics need to be decolonized in their theology. Just like I was saying earlier, Christian theology in America, all of it, every denomination, every iteration of it, has colonialist residue that
Yeah.
any Black person who is a part of any of those denominations is going to experience some kind of theological bondage. Therefore,
Wow.
they need to experience some kind of theological liberation. Like we're all operating under the same ideas, even though we might have differing doctrines and creeds and practices. We are all kind of bound by the same colonialist chains. So while our doctrines might be different, the colonialist chains are exactly the same across denomination. And so I think that we've got to begin to think more broadly around these topics and just kind of blur or eliminate the barriers that that denomination has created for us.
Oh, that I received that. So we're rounding out this conversation. I did want to get this one question in related to our first panel. Minister Ronnie Vanderhorst mentioned this term of sovereignty. He introduced into our discussion this term sovereignty. What are your thoughts as it applies to our denominational context? This notion of sovereignty. What does that bring up in your mind? And should that be a goal of Black Adventists writ large here in North America?
So please, I've watched part one, but please refresh me on kind of like the context and what was meant by the term sovereignty.
So essentially, that Black institutions within our denomination should essentially be sovereign. You shouldn't define something with the same word, but essentially, they should stand on their own, not necessarily be under our institutional hierarchy. So right now, we're under North American Division, the General Conference, that kind of thing. If we were to be a movement outside of the current structure that we have.
Yo, your camera just went out, Sydney.
Yeah.
While he's working
it got so good I forgot to reset it. Thanks.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, you're good, man.
Yeah.
I have had a couple conversations with people about this. I will be honest. I have a potentially controversial stance. I am not necessarily for a whole exodus of Black Adventists. So when I hear that term, the first thing that kind of comes to my mind is Black Adventists leave the world church structure as we understand it, and then we create a separate denomination similar to AME Zion, and how various other denominations did, particularly Black individuals. They left their kind of white overarching structure, and then they created a separate structure. I'm not against it. Like, I have no judgment on it. I don't have a this is bad, we should not do this in any way, shape, or form. But I'm also just a bit leery of it. And I don't necessarily, I'm not excited. It doesn't, when I hear it, it doesn't make me say, yo, that is the answer. One of the reasons why I feel that personally is, for one, I feel like we're going to leave Adventism to recreate Adventism, right? You're going to leave an institution to create another institution, right? So I think so many times we often think that, man, these people are doing it wrong. And if I had the opportunity to do it, I would do it this way, and I would do it right, and I would do it better. And then oftentimes individuals leave, they create their institution, and then it has its own institutionalized issues, right? Because I think that the problem within humanity is institutions in and of itself. It is social hierarchies within themselves, right? Like, so that you're going to leave one social hierarchy, you're going to create another, which is going to have its own problems.
Right.
So that generations later, should the Lord delay his coming, there will be individuals that are like, man, this was some foolishness. Like, they don't know what they're doing. We should leave and do blah, 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 blah. So, but again, like, I have no like conclusive judgments. These are just the things that kind of swirl in my mind around this. That said, I also understand how important it is that we as Black people, particularly within the Adventist Church, have some independence within our ability to kind of do what it is that we do in ministry. As I have grown to kind of understand our church culture and our church structure right now, a lot of the problem is not so much with President Wilson. Instead, there is great problem within our regional conference leadership.
Oh, I thought you were going there.
I am going to go there. I think that we are a bit confused, and I think we put a little bit too much blame on the white Adventist church for controlling what we can and cannot do within the regional work. And that is not a fair assessment in any way, shape, or form. Now, does white Adventism have its problems? Absolutely. I'm the first person to tell you exactly what they are. But I think that it's also critical that we understand that 70% of the tithe stays within the regional conference leadership's hands. So the conversation is not so much how is President Wilson and others up within the division and the world church using our tithe money, so much as it is how is your regional conference president and your regional conference treasurer and your regional conference executive secretary
My Lord,
using their tithe dollars. I think there is a greater conversation around leadership and how we do things, how people are chosen. And so I cannot say that we are independent, for we certainly are not that within our structure. But we have a whole lot of leeway. And I personally feel as though the issue is not so much that we need to leave our church structure because of white supremacy and colonialism. I think what it is that we need to hold our regional conference leadership accountable and to a much higher standard of evaluation and use of our funds, means, talents, personnel, etc., so that we can do many of the things that are on our hearts to do within the community. Because I can guarantee you right now, I can tell you, Jan Paulson, Dan Jackson, and now Alex Bryant are not keeping Black Adventist local churches from going into the community and doing social justice. President Ted Wilson is not even thinking, like, your social justice program has not even hit his agenda. It's not on his calendar. It's nowhere on his desk. So, and if you do it, he's not going to get notified either. Right. So I think that that's kind of where my heart is. I understand the desire and the passion, and I get it. I do, and I truly do believe in our ministries. I just feel like, and I'm, as you can see, I'm choosing my words because I've talked about this in more flippant terminology, and that has not been appreciated. And so I think that our structure is there, and I think that our independence is plausible even within our current setup. The issue is not the white man. The issue is the Black man.
All right. So I got to follow up with this. So what does it look like to hold our leadership accountable?
You know, I think that It's a variety of strategies. When I
Hmm.
look at the example of, Dr. Frank Hale in the past and the Layman's Leadership Council, oftentimes what they would do is many of our foreparents straight up published scathing articles in public publications
Yeah.
like the Washington Post, the New Yorker, I mean, kind of large scale. And one thing about Adventism, it can be black, it can be white, but Adventism is big on their image.
Yes,
The
true.
moment that you attack the image of having things together, the image of, correctness and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you get attention. And so I think that that is kind of our form of rioting, if you would, when Black people really begin to publish in ways that put a stain on how they are doing things in some way, shape, or form. And so we've even seen this, within COVID, when myself or other individuals have made posts or gone on panels or interviews and spoken
Hmm.
up about how things are going and what they're not doing. Now they are forced to have certain conversations that they were unwilling to have previously. Particularly considering the fact that there currently is no forum set in place for the lay people to kind of hold their leadership accountable in the same way that we used to have several years ago with forums and town halls and different things like that, triangle sessions. So I think that social media, I think that publishing in large non-Adventist publications are excellent means of holding our leadership accountable. I also think letter writing and phone calls are great too. I feel like our lay people have always been quick to write the regional conference leadership when their local pastor isn't doing what they want him to do.
Right.
But they all of a sudden don't remember how to get in contact with them when they aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And then now the question is, how do we hold them accountable? You have his cell phone number. You have his email, right? Like, you actually know him. I don't. But that doesn't really necessarily stop me, right? So I think that, it is both public pressure as well as private pressure. How can
Mhm.
we reach out to them, contact them, press them? How can we work alongside our local pastors? Because the fact of the matter is our pastors' livelihood is attached to certain things. So our local pastors cannot say certain things to their employers.
Right.
So a lot of this work around holding our regional conference leadership accountable must lie with the laity. Because if our pastor goes and says the things that we want to say, the things that I'm saying right now, he very well could lose his job. Whereas I can say it and I'm okay, right? You can say it for Dr. Freeman because the University of Iowa is taking care of your house and home, right? And so
Idaho.
Idaho. So they could be frustrated. They could feel however they want to feel about what you or I might say,
Hmm.
but they cannot fire you. They
Right.
cannot put you and your family in jeopardy. And so I think that the laity needs to kind of really step up to the plate around holding regional conference leadership accountable and applying that pressure both publicly and privately.
Yeah. One of the things that the feedback that I received on the first panel was just the kind of gender balance that we had on the panel, but also that it just so happened that the pastors that were on the panel were not regional conference pastors. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so, would regional conference pastors be able to speak as freely and critique what's going on a platform such as this, given their employment? And so it's interesting. It's almost like many of us who have worked for historically Black colleges, we've
Mm.
had challenging experiences, but we'll never say those experiences given
Mm.
kind of, we would never want to stain our institutions publicly. And
Ah.
so it's an interesting thing. So it's in some ways easier to critique the broader system if we are working in a black system. It's easier to critique the bigger system
Absolutely.
given your positionality.
That's so
Were you about to say
good.
something?
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's so good because I really feel like that's what's happening in the Black Adventist Church. I think that we are focusing all of our attention on the white racism within our world church to the neglect of holding accountable our Black regional conference leadership that has made very poor decisions regarding our tithe, regarding our leadership, regarding our personnel, regarding evangelism. That was not a GC voted, NAD voted issue. That was a local issue. So that in the same way, when we talk about social justice within our communities at large, right? When we're talking about police brutality, we're talking about a local, state, county issue. When you want to get any kind of legislation, any kind of change for your police department, that is a local, state, county issue. That is
Mm-hmm.
not a Donald Trump issue. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you focus on police brutality with Donald Trump, you don't get anywhere. And I
Right.
think that if this is what we are saying that we want to do as a Black church, we have to recognize this is a local religious issue. And these are the leaders and individuals that need to be held accountable for that change. And we must be okay with recognizing that we might have to put a stain on an institution that we otherwise are uncomfortable doing because we as Black people don't like to put other Black people out there.
Right.
But we can't keep saying President Wilson is the problem and President Wilson is why I can't do social justice work. That's not true.
That's not, yeah.
And so
So
now we have solutions coming in that don't necessarily really address the problem,
yeah.
like sovereignty. So I don't feel as though sovereignty is the solution to what our problem is, because it is rooted in the idea that, you know, we need to remove ourselves from white supremacist Adventist structure, ideology, theology, etc. And I just don't think that it's a full picture of what's going on within our church.
I appreciate that. So my final question is, what else would you like our audience to know in preparation for Sabbath? What can
Man,
they look forward to?
I think that the thing that is on my heart when it comes to decolonizing a Black religious mind
Mm-hmm.
is, I think that when I first watched the Black Panther back in February of 2018, and I saw all of these kind of fictional African images that obviously are based off of, you know, African realities. The first thing that I remember God really speaking to me on was that, man, all of us were looking to this fictional world as though the real one did not exist. And it was as though we were looking for this Wakanda, this place where Black people can thrive and not experience bigotry and prejudice, et cetera, et cetera. And I just felt like, man, as Adventists, regardless of race, we believe in a real New Jerusalem. You know what I mean? Like, we
Mm-hmm.
believe in a very real Wakanda that is going to come and touch earth again. And there will be a space where you can experience everything that you are wanting spiritually and religiously. That said, I really felt like God tapped me and said, Claudia, there is a kind of intimacy with me that you have not yet experienced because your access to me and your engagement with me has been exclusively white European American.
Wow.
And you must access me through yourself,
Yeah.
your actual being. And that really led me to really studying the story of Hagar. And in studying the story of Hagar in the Bible, I see a Black African slave woman who has been raped by her master at the request of her mistress. When she is then confronted with the child, the mistress is now mad. So she, sends her away, right? And we find this Black African slave woman in the wilderness, and it is in her turmoil, it is in her experience of pain and bondage that she literally has an encounter with God that causes her to name him El Roi. And nowhere else in scripture do we see someone personally naming God. And I just feel like God genuinely wants people of all races, of all backgrounds, to have such an intimate experience with them, such an intimate encounter with them that is based on their trauma, their race and nationality, their culture, their social and political disenfranchisement. He wants us to have such an intimate and authentic experience with him that we name him out of our experience and out of our encounter, so that God does not simply hold names that have been given to us by white people, but we have named him ourselves. I go back to where we started with that language. We've got to get to this place where we give our spiritual experience language that has not been given to us, but language that has been found and discovered in intimacy with God. I think that that's what it means to really decolonize the Black mind. I don't think it's so much about leaving structures and systems and institutions. I think that it's about taking your spirituality to a kind of depth that you see and know and understand God, not through a white European lens, but through my very mixed Black, African American, white Native American lens. Because yes, I am a Black African American who is a descendant of slaves. And because of that built up, I have white in me. I have Jewish heritage in me. I've got Native American heritage in me. I've got African heritage in me that I can't even trace. And so because of that amalgamation, God is wanting to have an encounter with me that is unique to me. And that is, I think, the burden that I have on my heart for people and wanting them to experience this kind of liberation and theological emancipation within their imaginings about God and who they understand God to be. Not so much a matter of embracing and taking on the thoughts of now others, like, okay, I'm going to get rid of the white man and I'm going to pick up the African. I'm saying read all of it, understand all of it, and in deep prayer and deep study and journaling, excavate who God is in the scriptures itself alone. And in your encounter, in your genuine, authentic, transparent encounter with God, where he's speaking to you about you, name him yourself. Come up with language for him yourself. And I believe that when I'm still on that journey. I don't have the language yet. And I say that to let you know that this is not an easy track. When you truly begin the journey of decolonizing your mind and really going on an excavation of spiritual understanding to deeper understand who God is to you with language that he is going to give to you, that's not information that you're going to come to naturally. It's going to take some time. And so I think that that's what I want for people, is just the opportunity to do that work for their spiritual benefit. And in doing that, I feel like we will experience a next level understanding of God that currently our setup is kind of potentially restricting us from.
Wow. I thank you so much for taking time with us today to just share these insights. To our audience, you're going to be able to experience more of this on Sabbath at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. There's going to be multiple ways that you can see it. You can subscribe to my channel, Sidney Freeman Jr., and then also you can like my Facebook page, Sidney Freeman Jr. I also before we left, I wanted to give Claudia an opportunity to also share any of her information as far as if people would like to reach out to you and to learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. You can follow me right here on Facebook, on Instagram at Kamal, Camaal 365. But if you type my name in, Claudia M. Allen, it should pop up. So yeah, I'm actually starting a podcast within the next couple of weeks. I'm super
Oh yeah,
excited about,
awesome.
called Radical Reading. And it's literally this. It is how, giving you, the listener, the viewer, access to all of the books that I read, and kind of expanding your mind around both spiritual topics and political topics and other topics. And so yeah, at Kamal 365, at Radical Reading on Instagram, and you can follow me there and learn more, and we can learn together.
All right. Thank you so much. Tomorrow at the same time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, on my page, we have another guest that will be on the panel, Pastor Lawrence Souffant, who is going to share some of his insights regarding the topic of decolonizing the Black Adventist mind. So thank you again for coming and watching, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow and then throughout the week and culminating on Sabbath. Thank you. Have a good night.